Welcome, nighttime traveler, to Sleepy Bedtime Stories, your haven of stories and tales to help you sleep. This is the place where traditional tales come to life and accompany you on your journey to rest. But first, tell me where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. I'd love to know if you're joining me from your bed, from a cozy sofa, or perhaps from some corner of the world where you can still feel the spirit of ancient tales. Please leave me a comment. Every message from you is like a fragment of a precious amphora. If you'd like to support this space of peace and relaxation, subscribe and share the channel so that more people can find their refuge here. And now, take a slow, deep breath, because tonight, we're going to dive into another thrilling story.
Fairy Tales and Magical Creatures. Chapter 1. The Invisible Realm. Fairies. Enchanted forests and moonlight. Close your eyes for a moment. Breathe slowly. There is a place between sleep and wakefulness, between what you can touch and what you can only feel, a place where the air smells of damp moss and flowers that have no name, where the light comes not from the sun but from something older, gentler, more secret. That place has always been there. It always has been. It's just that most of us, over time, have learned not to look at it. This is the story of that place. This is the story of the invisible realm. There is a time just before dawn, when the world seems to hold its breath. It is not yet night, but neither is it day. The birds have not yet begun to sing. The darkness grows softer, almost bluish, as if someone had spilled very diluted ink across the sky. In the forests of Europe, at that hour the Celts called the hour between hours, the peasants of old knew it was best not to leave the house. For at that precise moment, at that fragile threshold, where two worlds brush against one another without quite touching, the veil between the visible and the invisible grew thinner until it became as transparent as a dragonfly's wing. And then, if one knew how to look, one could see them. The fairies, the beings of light, the inhabitants of the other side. For thousands of years, across all cultures and on every continent, human beings have believed in them. Not as a metaphor, not as a bedtime story to entertain children, but as a reality as tangible as the fire crackling in the hearth, as the bread baked every morning, as the rain falling on the fields in autumn. Fairies were real. So real that there were rules for dealing with them. So real that there were words that must not be spoken aloud near certain trees. So real that entire generations of men and women built their daily lives around them. with the same care with which we today build our routines around traffic and working hours. How did humans come to believe in this? Where did the idea arise that the forest was inhabited by beings that were neither animals, nor people, nor gods, but something entirely different? The answer, like almost all true answers, is not simple, and it begins much earlier than we might imagine. Let us travel back in time, far back, more than 30,000 years ago, to the banks of a European river whose name no one remembers. On a winter's night that lasted for weeks, a group of human beings, our most distant ancestors, take refuge in a cave. Outside, the wind howls with a fury that seems deliberate, that seems angry, that seems alive. The fire flickers inside the cave. Shadows dance across the stone walls. And one of those men, or perhaps one of those women, gazes at the dancing shadows and sees in them something that wasn't there before. Silhouettes that move of their own accord. Shapes that seem to have a will of their own. Figures that enter and exit the rock as if the stone were merely another kind of air. No one knows exactly what that person was thinking at that moment, but their hands betrayed them, or perhaps obeyed them perfectly, and they began to paint. On the cave wall, with red ochre and black charcoal, they drew what they saw. Not just bison and mammoths and wild horses. They also drew figures that were not quite human. Figures that were part animal and part spirit. Figures that seemed to float between two worlds. Those paintings still exist. They are in Lascaux, in the south of France. They are in Altamira, in the north of Spain. They are in caves in Australia, South Africa, and Indonesia. And in all of them, mixed in with depictions of real animals, those other figures appear. Those ambiguous forms, those beings of the threshold. Perhaps that was where it all began. In a dark cave, before a flickering fire, when a human being looked at the shadows and decided they were not alone. The word we use today, fairy, is extraordinarily ancient. It comes from the Latin fata, which in turn comes from fatum, fate. Fairies, in their deepest origins, were not simply magical beings who lived in flowers or in forest mushrooms. They were the spinners of fate. They were the ones who decided, at the moment of birth, what life each person would live. The Roman Parcae, the Greek Moirai, the Norse Norns who wove the threads of the world at the roots of the tree Yggdrasil. All of them are versions of the same primordial idea that there are feminine forces, invisible, older than the gods themselves, who weave the fabric of reality as if the entire universe were an endless cloth. This idea is so universal. It appears in so many cultures with no apparent contact between them, that scholars have come to wonder whether there is not something in the human mind, something deeply engraved in our neurological architecture, that predisposes us to perceive the world in this way, to feel that behind the visible there is something more, to sense that the forests are inhabited, to hear voices in the wind. But before we continue our journey through time, let us pause here, in this moment, and allow our eyes to adjust to the darkness. Imagine a European forest in spring, perhaps 2,000 years ago, before Rome arrived with its stone roads and iron legions. A forest that no one has yet felled. A forest where the oaks are 500 years old and their roots intertwine beneath the earth like the fingers of a giant hand. A forest where sunlight reaches the ground only in small golden patches, like coins scattered across the dark grass. A forest where silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of thousands of sounds so interwoven that they form something continuous, something alive, something that breathes. The Celts live in that forest. They do not live inside the forest. Exactly. But they live around it. And the forest is the center of everything. The forest is the cathedral. The forest is the place where the druids perform their rituals, where the gods speak through the wind amongst the branches, where time works differently. The Celts have a word for the beings who inhabit that space, the Tuatha De Danann. The people of the goddess Danu, beings of light and magic who, according to their traditions, arrived in Ireland before humans and who, when they were defeated in battle, did not disappear but simply withdrew. They went down into the earth, into the hollow hills called Seedhay, and from there, from that parallel world that existed just beneath the visible world, they continue to watch. They continue to intervene. They continue to be. The relationship between the Celts and these beings was not exactly one of fear, although fear was part of it. It was something more complex. It was the same mixture of respect, fascination, and caution with which one might relate to a force of nature, to a thunderstorm or a river in flood. They were not worshipped as gods, although they could grant favors. They were not feared as demons, although they could cause harm. They were simply the others, those who had always been there, the neighbors on the other side of the invisible door. And that gateway, the Celts knew exactly where it was. It was neither a wooden nor a stone gateway. It was a gateway of time. It opened 4 times a year, at the turning points of the seasons, at Samhain, in late October, when the year was drawing to a close, at Imbolc, in early February, when the earth began to awaken, at Beltane, in early May, when the world blossomed, and at Lughnasadh, in late July, when the harvest began. On those nights, the veil grew thin, and beings from the other side could cross over into this world, and humans could, if they were brave enough or mad enough, cross over to the other side. Samhain is the most famous of those nights. We know it today in the guise of Halloween, transformed into lit-up pumpkins and plastic costumes. But in its origins, it was something completely different. It was the longest night of the year in terms of significance, though not in terms of duration. It was the night when the dead returned home, when the Sidhe rode the roads, when it was possible to see things that ought not to be seen and know things that ought not to be known. Families would leave an empty seat at the table and a bowl of milk on the doorstep, not as a symbolic gesture, but as a protocol, as the proper way to interact with forces that existed regardless of whether one believed in them or not. This custom of leaving offerings on the threshold appears in almost all European traditions relating to magical beings, and not just European ones. In Japan, the Zashiki Warashi, small household spirits that bring prosperity to the homes they inhabit, also receive offerings of rice and sake. In Mexico, the Aluxes, Mayan goblins who guard the fields, must be appeased with gifts, or else they turn their power against the farmer. In the Middle East, the jinn, beings of fire who dwell in solitary places, also demand respect and recognition. The coincidence is too perfect to be a coincidence. Everywhere, in every age, human beings have reached the same conclusion: we share this world with others. And the right way to behave in the face of that reality is with humility, with generosity, and with attentiveness. But let us return to Europe, for it is there that the tradition of fairies reached its richest and most elaborate expression. And to understand that tradition in all its complexity, we need to focus on a specific historical moment, the 12th century AD, on the island of Great Britain, when something extraordinary began to happen. It was a time of profound transformation. The medieval world was in the midst of being built. Gothic cathedrals were beginning to rise towards the sky like prayers of stone. The Crusades were taking European knights to the Holy Land and back, laden with strange tales and encounters with completely different cultures. The Latin of the Church coexisted with the vernacular languages that were emerging. Old French, Middle English, Welsh, each bearing its own traditions and myths. And amidst all that, something began to take shape. A collection of stories that had existed for centuries in oral form, passed down by word of mouth around village fires, began to find their way onto parchment. The Arthurian legends, the Breton cycle, the matter of Britain. These stories, which we now know as King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, Merlin the Wizard, the Lady of the Lake, the Holy Grail, were not merely entertainment. They were a complete cosmology, a way of understanding the relationship between the human world and the magical world, between what can be seen and what can only be sensed, between the power of men and the power of something older and deeper. The Lady of the Lake, for example, is not simply a fairy tale character. She is the direct heir to the Celtic water goddesses, to the sacred women who inhabited the lakes and rivers and who, according to ancient beliefs, were the true mistresses of the earth. She hands the sword Excalibur to King Arthur, and that handover is not an arbitrary gesture. It is a contract between the human world and the magical world. The king receives his power from the invisible realm, and when that power is no longer needed, when Arthur dies at the Battle of Camlern, the sword must be returned to the lake. The circle must be closed. That which comes from the other world must return to the other world. This theme of borrowing, that magical gifts are temporary and must be returned, is one of the most persistent in the entire European fairy tradition. It is no coincidence. It reflects a profound understanding of the nature of time and power. Nothing is truly possessed. Everything is received on loan, and wisdom lies in making good use of what has been given to you whilst you have it, and in letting it go gracefully when the time comes to return it. Merlin, the wizard who guides and advises Arthur, is also a threshold figure. According to the oldest traditions, he is the son of a demon and a mortal woman, although in later versions his origin was softened and made more acceptable to Christian sensibilities. But in his most primitive essence, Merlin is a being between two worlds. He knows the future because he experiences time differently from humans. He can transform himself because he is not completely bound to any form. And at the end of his story, he does not die. He is imprisoned forever, or perhaps asleep, inside an oak tree, or inside a cave, or beneath a hill, depending on which version we hear. He returns to the world from whence he came. And in that return there is something that is not tragic, though it may seem so. There is something that is, deep down, very peaceful. Merlin's oak, the tree that contains the wizard. This image leads us to another fundamental element in the European fairy tradition: sacred trees. For the Celts, for the Germanic peoples, for the Scandinavians, for practically all the peoples of ancient Europe, forests were not simply collections of vegetation. They were places inhabited by spirits. Every old tree, especially oaks, ash trees, yews and white thorns, was home to a spirit. And these spirits were not hostile, generally speaking, but they were demanding. They demanded respect. They demanded that no branch be cut without first asking permission. They demanded that no path be built over their roots. They demanded that their presence be acknowledged. In Ireland, well into the 20th century, there were farmers who refused to cut down certain white thorns, even if they stood in the middle of their fields, even if they interfered with the plow, even if they caused obvious practical inconveniences, because those hawthorns were known as fairy thorns, and cutting them down brought misfortune. It was not superstition, or at least not for them. It was knowledge. It was the memory of generations who had lived in harmony with that tree and had observed what happened when it was disturbed. There was, in fact, a documented case on the island of Ireland that became famous in the first half of the 20th century. A construction company working on the widening of a road in County Clare needed to cut down an old hawthorn that stood right on the route of the new road. The local workers refused. The engineers, who had come from the city and did not share the local beliefs, ordered the tree to be cut down anyway. The tree was cut down, and in the months that followed, a series of accidents and setbacks befell the company with a consistency that was, at the very least, baffling. No one can prove that the two events were related. No one can prove it. But the story circulated and continues to circulate, and every time it is repeated, it adds another layer to that sediment of collective memory we call belief. Belief. That word which seems fragile yet proves to be extraordinarily resilient. In the year 1816, the English Romantic poet John Keats wrote a poem that is now considered one of the finest in the English language. It is entitled Time's La Belle Dame Sans Merci, the Beautiful Lady Without Mercy. In it, a gentleman is seduced and abandoned by a woman from another world, a creature of the magical realm who takes him to her kingdom, puts him to sleep, and when he awakens, the gentleman finds himself alone on a cold and barren hillside, and all he experienced is nothing more than a dream from which he cannot return. The poem captures something that has fascinated human beings since time immemorial: the idea that contact with the magical world is, at the same time, the most beautiful and the most devastating experience one can have. That entering that realm changes you forever. That the ordinary world, after having seen it, is never enough again. This idea, which academics call the fairy tale return syndrome, appears in hundreds of stories from all traditions. The man who is carried off by fairies and spends what he believes to be 3 days dancing and feasting, but when he returns to his village, 30 years have passed and all his loved ones have grown old or died. The woman who follows a strange light into the heart of a hill and emerges on the other side, convinced that only a few hours have passed, but finds that her children are now elderly. The musician who plays for the Sidhe on a full moon night and returns to discover that a century has passed. Time in the fairy realm does not work in the same way as in ours. This is one of the most persistent constants throughout the tradition. Why? Why did so many cultures, independently, arrive at the same conclusion that magical beings inhabited a space where time was different? Some modern interpretations suggest that these stories are codifications of real experiences. Experiences of altered states of consciousness, of exceptionally vivid dreams, of episodes that today we would describe in medical terms, but which in the past had no other language available except that of the magical. Other interpretations propose that they reflect an intuitive understanding of the relativity of time, that the subjective experience of time can be completely different from its objective measurement. And there are those who simply say that these stories are true, that time in the invisible world is different because that world obeys laws distinct from our own, that we do not have to choose between the rational and the magical explanation because perhaps, deep down, they are one and the same. But let us continue our journey, because the history of fairies in Europe did not stop with the Celts or the Arthurian legends. It transformed, it adapted, it survived. When Christianity arrived in the British Isles and Ireland, from the 5th century AD onwards, it found a territory already inhabited by an extraordinarily deep-rooted magical tradition. The missionaries were intelligent men. They knew they could not simply erase thousands of years of popular belief. Is greater than they knew that if they tried to eliminate the sacred places, the sacred trees, the rituals associated with beings from the other world, they would create a resistance that would make their work impossible. So, instead of erasing, they transformed. They absorbed. They adopted. The sacred springs, the springs that the Celts considered gateways to the other world and where they made offerings and prayers, were consecrated to Christian saints. The spring of Brigid, the Celtic goddess of fire and healing, became the spring of Saint Brigid. The seasonal rituals, Samhain, Imbolc, Beltane, Lugnasad, were transformed into All Saints' Day, Candlemas, May Day and Midsummer's Day, respectively. And the beings of the magical world, the Tuatha De Danann and all their counterparts, did not disappear. They simply changed status in the popular imagination. They were no longer defeated gods living beneath the hills. They became fallen angels, or spirits who were neither good enough for heaven nor bad enough for H, or simply the forgotten ones, those who existed on the margins of the new cosmic order. This resistance of fairies to being eradicated by official doctrine is fascinating. Throughout the Middle Ages, the Church attempted on numerous occasions to declare that fairies did not exist, that believing in them was a pagan superstition that should be abandoned. Ecclesiastical councils of the 8th and 9th centuries issued decrees against those who left offerings in the woods or at springs. Preachers condemned women who claimed to have been visited by beings from another world. And yet, the belief persisted. In the fields and woods, far from the cities and the great monasteries, the daily life of European peasants continued to revolve around that parallel reality which the Church refused to acknowledge. And in some cases, the Church itself ended up absorbing more than it had intended to eliminate. The fairy godmothers of folk tales, those benevolent figures who appear at the moment of birth or baptism and bestow gifts upon newborns, are direct heirs to the ancient parquet and the moirai, the spinners of fate. In the French tradition, they were called the fées marraines. In the Italian tradition, the fate. In the Spanish tradition, the hadas. And their presence at the moment of birth, their ability to bestow or withdraw gifts, their ambiguous nature, which can be benevolent or dangerous depending on whether they are treated with due respect. All of this stems directly from the pre-Christian tradition that was supposedly abandoned. The most famous story of an offended fairy godmother is also one of the oldest in Europe. It appears in multiple versions across many countries, but its best known form is what we now call Sleeping Beauty. A girl is born in a kingdom. The fairy godmothers are summoned to bestow their gifts. But one of them, the eldest, the most powerful, the one who was not invited because someone had forgotten her existence or because someone thought she no longer mattered, appears anyway. And instead of a gift, she leaves a curse. This story, which we know from the 17th century version by the French writer Charles Perrault and the later 19th century version by the Brothers Grimm, is in fact much older. Its basic structure, the offended power that takes revenge, the gift that turns into a curse, sleep as a form of suspended death, appears in sources that predate Perrault by centuries. In the Pentamerone by the Neapolitan Giambattista Basile, published in the year 1636, there is a version called Sun, Moon, and Thalia, which already contains all the essential elements. And before Basil, there are references to similar stories in medieval sources, which in turn drew on even older sources. Sleeping Beauty sleeps. And that sleep, that long sleep in the castle, overgrown with brambles, is an image that has resonated in the human imagination for centuries with a power that goes beyond the narrative. Because it speaks of something we have all felt at some point, the possibility that there exists, somewhere, a state of suspended grace where time stands still, where nothing can harm us, where we are waiting for the exact moment to wake up. The dream, the long dream of the enchanted forest. The enchanted forests of European fairy tales are not merely settings. They are characters. They have a will of their own. They open or close according to their own rules. In the forest of the tale of Hansel and Gretel, which the Brothers Grimm included in their 1812 collection, the forest is not merely the place where the children get lost. It is the active agent of their downfall. It is the forest that swallows them up. It is the forest that prevents them from finding their way back. And it is in the heart of the forest, in the darkest and densest part, that the witch dwells, who, in her most ancient form, was not simply an evil old woman but a priestess, a seer, a guardian of knowledge that the official world preferred to ignore. The Brothers Grimm, Jacob and Wilhelm, were 19th century German scholars who set out to collect the oral stories of German folk tradition. What they collected, however, was not exactly what the people told. The stories they published in their various editions, the first in 1812 and the best known in 1857, were edited, toned down, and adapted to make them acceptable to the bourgeois families of the time. The mothers, who in the original versions were the main villains, were turned into stepmothers. The endings, which in the oral sources were ambiguous or downright grim, were transformed into happy endings. The scenes of sexuality or explicit violence that formed part of the original stories were removed. But even so, even after all that editorial cleansing, something profound survived on those pages. Something that could not be removed because it was the very essence of the stories, the idea that the world has layers, that what seems real is not always so, and what seems impossible sometimes turns out to be the only truth. Germanic tradition had its own magical beings, distinct from the Celtic fairies, but springing from the same primordial source. The Alban, the Elfin, the spirits of nature who could be benevolent or malevolent depending on how they were treated, is greater than the Nixon, water spirits who took human form to seduce the unwary. The Wolpertinger, chimeric creatures that inhabited the Bavarian forests and combined characteristics of multiple animals in ways that defied classification. The Slavic Rusalki, spirits of young women who had died before their time, inhabiting rivers and lakes, with hair as green as seaweed, and feet that never touched the ground. Every region of Europe had its own. In Scandinavia, the Huldra, forest creatures that looked like beautiful women from the front, but had backs as hollow as a tree. The Tomte or Nisse, small household spirits who protected farms and stables in exchange for a bowl of porridge with butter on Christmas Eve. The Fossegrim, water musicians who taught people to play the violin in exchange for food offerings. In Scotland, the Kelpies, water horses that dragged their riders to the bottom of lakes. The Selkies, seals that could shed their skin and become human, but who always longed for the sea. The Brownies, small household spirits who carried out chores in homes at night and who would vanish forever if anyone gave them clothes as a gift. This last belief, that giving clothes to a magical being sets them free but also drives them away, appears in many European traditions. In England, boggarts and brownies. In Ireland, leprechauns. In Germany, kobolds. All of them shared this same characteristic. They were free if they received clothes, and that freedom was a form of farewell. It is tempting to see this as a metaphor for the nature of voluntary service, for the difference between work done out of love or habit and work that becomes an obligation. But perhaps it is more than a metaphor. perhaps it is a very ancient understanding of the nature of certain bonds. In Irish tradition, the fairies, the Ausi, the Sidhe, the Daween Maith, meaning the good neighbors, a euphemism to avoid uttering their real name and attracting their unwanted attention, had their own geography within the island's landscape. Certain hills, known as Rath or Fort, were their known abodes. The paths linking these hills, called fairy roads, had to be strictly respected. Building a house that blocked one of these paths was an invitation to disaster. Planting anything on those paths was equally dangerous. 19th century Irish peasants, even those who considered themselves good Catholics, planned the layout of their houses and fields with due regard for the invisible network of paths that beings from the other world used to travel. This idea of a sacred geography running parallel to physical geography, that the landscape has an invisible dimension which must be respected even if it cannot be seen, is extraordinarily persistent. It appears in the Chinese tradition of feng shui, in the Australian Aboriginal tradition of the dreaming, in the Andean tradition of the Sikhs radiating from the center of imperial Cuzco, and in the traditions of the indigenous peoples of North America regarding places of power. Human beings, everywhere, have sensed that the territory they inhabit has an invisible structure, a network of forces and meanings that are not visible but are as real as the earth beneath their feet. And in Europe, that invisible structure had a central element, a place that recurred in all traditions, the forest. Always the forest. Why the forest? Why, for tens of thousands of years, from cave paintings to the Grimm's fairy tales and beyond, has the forest been the place where magic dwells, where the rules of the ordinary world are suspended, where encounters with the other are possible? The simplest answer is that for most of human history in Europe, the forest was literally the edge of the known world. Beyond the last cultivated field, beyond the last recognizable path, the forest began. And the forest was dark. It was dense. It was disorienting in a way that today, in the world of satellite maps and GPS-enabled phones, is almost impossible to imagine, is greater than to venture into the forest without knowledge, without a guide, without the mental cues accumulated from years of experience, was to enter a space where death was a real possibility. The cold, predatory animals, disorientation, hunger. The forest killed the unwary with a regularity that fully justified the respect, the caution, the fear it inspired in those who lived on its fringes. But there was more. because the forest was not only dangerous, the forest was also necessary. It was the source of the firewood that kept them warm during the winters. It was the source of the game that supplemented their diet in times of scarcity. It was the source of the medicinal plants that those in the know could gather and which cured illnesses that would otherwise be fatal. The forest gave and took away. The forest was exactly like the beings that inhabited it, according to popular belief. An ambivalent power that had to be respected, courted with care, and never underestimated. And there was a third element that made the forest the ideal territory for the magical light. Or more precisely, the way light works in the forest. The sunbeams filtering through the leaves and creating shifting patterns on the ground. The shadows that move even when there is no wind. The fleeting flash that looks like a figure amongst the tree trunks and vanishes when you look directly at it. The forest is a place where peripheral vision, that human ability to detect movement at the edges of our field of vision, is constantly at work. And peripheral vision, evolutionarily speaking, is the oldest alarm system we possess. It warns us of dangers before we have consciously identified them. And in the forest, that system works tirelessly, creating the constant sensation that there is something else, that we are not alone, that something is watching us from amongst the trees. Perhaps, in the beginning, fairies were exactly that. They were that sensation. They were the experience of sensing a presence that cannot be identified but cannot be denied either. And over time, as the human mind always does in the face of the unknown, that sensation was given a name, a form, a story, and the story grew. And it grew over thousands of years. And it became so rich, so complex, so beautiful, that it no longer needed to be true in the way a stone or a tree is to be profoundly real. It was real in a different way. It was real in the way that dreams are real. It was real in the way that love is real. It was real because people cared about it, because it gave meaning to their lives, because it offered them a language to speak of what would otherwise have no name. This brings us to the moment that many historians consider the great turning point in the European fairy tradition, the Renaissance. The 15th and 16th centuries, with their explosion of interest in classical antiquity, with their growing faith in human reason, with their gradual departure from the medieval worldview, represent, for many, the moment when the enchanted world began its long retreat. The world was being measured, catalogued, explained, and in a world that can be fully explained, there is no room for fairies. But something strange happened. Instead of disappearing, the fairies transformed. Instead of retreating before the advance of rational thought, they found a new home: literature. William Shakespeare, the English playwright who wrote in the final decades of the 16th century and the early decades of the 17th, was the first to do something that no one had attempted before: to bring the world of fairies to the stage with all its ambiguity and complexity intact. In his play, A Midsummer Night's Dream, written around the year 1595, Shakespeare created a fairy world that was not merely decorative. It was a world with its own rules, its own hierarchies, its own conflicts. Oberon and Titania, the king and queen of the fairies, are figures of a power that is not ridiculous but genuinely imposing. Their disputes affect the weather, the harvests, the balance of nature. They are powerful in a way that the Olympian gods, with all their grandeur, do not always manage to convey. Puck, the spirit of the forest who carries out Oberon's whims, is perhaps the most fascinating character in the entire play. He is mischievous but not malicious. He is powerful but not omnipotent. He is greater than he is ancient. Ancient indeed. Far older than anything the human characters in the play could ever imagine, yet also completely indifferent to the gravity with which humans regard their problems. To Puck, the amorous entanglements of the four young Athenians are merely an entertaining distraction, a comedy of errors starring ephemeral creatures who take their own emotions far too seriously. What was a great tragedy yesterday will be forgotten tomorrow, and the forest will remain the forest, with its secrets intact. This indifference of the fairies towards human suffering is another constant element in the tradition. It is not exactly cruelty. It is distance. It is the distance that exists between two forms of life that have completely different timescales. A being that can live for thousands of years inevitably perceives the events of a human life differently. What is a catastrophe to us is but a blink of an eye to them. What is a whole lifetime to us is but a brief episode to them. And this temporal asymmetry is, at its core, the source of both the terror and the fascination that magical beings have always inspired in the human imagination. But whilst Shakespeare gave fairies their most complex literary form, it was in the 19th century that they found their greatest popularity. The Romantic era, with its rejection of Enlightenment rationalism and its nostalgia for a more mysterious and more spiritual past, rescued fairies from the semi-oblivion to which reason had condemned them, and restored them with a fervor they had not known since the Middle Ages. In Germany, the Brothers Grimm collected their tales. In Denmark, Hans Christian Andersen created new stories with the same underlying structure as the old ones. In Ireland, W. B. Yeats, the poet who would go on to win the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1923, spent decades collecting fairy tales from the Irish countryside with the same seriousness with which other scholars studied ancient history. For Yeats, fairies were not merely folklore. They were living proof that reality had more layers than modern science was willing to admit. And in England, the Pre-Raphaelite movement produced some of the most extraordinary paintings ever devoted to the subject of fairies. Richard Dad, a painter who was committed to a mental asylum after killing his father in a state of what we would today diagnose as acute psychosis, spent the last 40 years of his life painting fairy worlds of absolutely overwhelming complexity and visual density. His most famous work, The Sloppy Goldsmith, is a window into a world of tiny beings so elaborate, so specific, so full of detail that it seems the result of direct vision rather than creative imagination. Each figure has its own expression, its own story, its own place in a hierarchy that the painter seemed to know with disconcerting precision. Where did all that knowledge go? All that which for millennia formed part of the cognitive structure of European humanity. That way of perceiving the world as inhabited, as alive, as full of presences that deserved respect and attention. The official answer is that it disappeared, that it was replaced by science, by reason, by an understanding of the world that no longer needed magical explanations for natural phenomena. And there is some truth in that. Of course, lightning is no longer Thor's hammer. Epidemics are no longer the punishment of the gods. Earthquakes are no longer the movements of subterranean creatures. But the experience from which all those explanations arose, the direct experience that the world is more than it seems, that there are presences in the forest, in the water, and in the earth that are not merely physical. That experience has not disappeared. It is still there. Millions of people in the contemporary world who are educated, rational, and fully integrated into modernity report experiences that do not fit with the official view of the world, encounters with presences in nature that cannot be identified with any known animal or phenomenon, moments of contact with something that seems alive and intelligent in solitary places, sensations of being observed in woods and meadows where there is no one. Most of these people do not consider themselves superstitious. Most of these people do not necessarily believe in fairies in the way that medieval beliefs describe them. But something happened to them, something they had no language to describe, or for which the only available language was precisely that, the language of fairies. The Swiss philosopher Carl Gustav Jung, in the first half of the 20th century, developed the theory that humanity's collective unconscious contains archetypes, figures and patterns of experience that are shared by all human beings, regardless of their culture and personal history. Fairies, Jung proposed, are one such archetype. They are the way in which the human psyche represents the experience of the unknown, of that which lies beyond conscious control, of the forces operating beneath the surface of everyday life, is greater than. From this perspective, fairies need not be literally real to be profoundly true. They are a psychological technology, a way of giving form to the formless, a way of engaging with what would otherwise be simply terrifying. But perhaps Jung and all those who have attempted to explain fairies in rational terms are making the same mistake as the Enlightenment rationalists did when they tried to eliminate them, the mistake of assuming that what cannot be measured or categorized cannot be real. Perhaps the right question is not whether fairies are real or imaginary, but what kind of reality belongs to them. Perhaps they exist in that in-between zone, in that liminal space the Celts knew so well, between what we can touch and what we can only sense. This question has no definitive answer, and perhaps that is exactly as it should be, because fairies, from the very beginning, have been creatures of the threshold. They have dwelled on the edges, in the hour between night and day, in the moment between sleep and waking, in the space between the forest and the field, in the moment between one season and the next. They have always existed in the place where categories dissolve, where what seems solid becomes fluid, where what seemed impossible turns out to be the only thing that makes sense. And perhaps that is why they are still here. Despite everything, despite centuries of rationalism and science and modernity and screens and cities that never sleep, despite the fact that we no longer have primeval forests in which to lose ourselves, despite the fact that the night sky is too bright to see the stars, despite everything, fairies persist. In the stories we keep telling, in the films we keep making, in the books we keep writing, in the games we keep playing, in the dreams we keep having, because there is something in us that needs to believe that the world does not end with what we can see, that there is something beyond the horizon of the known, that the forest is inhabited, that the moon, when it lights up the countryside at midnight, is revealing something that remains hidden by day. That somewhere behind that hill, beneath that ancient oak, there exists a realm where time works differently, where beauty is so intense it hurts, where we who dwell fleetingly in this world are the strangers, we the visitors, we who pass briefly through a place they have known since time immemorial. Close your eyes. Breathe slowly. Listen to the silence. Can you feel it? That space at the heart of the silence, where the noise of the world cannot reach. That space that has something of the forest, something of the full moon, something of water running over ancient stones. That space that was never quite yours, but which you recognize, that you have always recognized, as if you had been there before and carried it engraved somewhere beneath all the words and all the thoughts. That is the place. That is the invisible realm. It has always been there. And whilst you sleep tonight, as your breathing slows and your thoughts begin to lose their shape, perhaps you'll draw a little closer to that threshold. Perhaps you'll see, in that final moment before sleep takes you, a flash of light amongst the trees. Perhaps you will hear, far away, almost inaudible, a melody that no one has composed but which you nevertheless know. Perhaps you will feel, for a fleeting moment, that the veil is thinning. And if that happens, don't be afraid. Don't resist. Those in the know say that the best thing you can do is what the peasants of the Celtic islands used to do when Samhain drew near. Set a place at the table. Leave some milk on the threshold, and simply trust that there is a wisdom older than anything we can learn. A wisdom the world has known since before there were words to name it, and that sometimes, in the quietest moments, the darkest and brightest at the same time, that wisdom draws near and whispers something in your ear. You just have to be still enough to hear it. Good night. The forest is alive tonight, and the fairies, as always, are waiting at the threshold. Tales of Fairies and Magical Beings. Chapter 2. Magical Guardians and Ancient Secrets Under the Stars. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine that the world stands still, that the noise of the day fades away little by little, like the echo of a bell ringing in the distance and then dying away amongst the trees. Is greater than imagine that night falls gently, as it always has, since the dawn of time, covering the earth with its dark cloak, studded with light. There is something about the night that we humans have forgotten over the centuries. Something our ancestors knew very well. Something they felt in their bones as they sat around the fire and looked up towards that infinite sky that enveloped them like a promise. The night is not empty. The night is full of ancient voices, of gentle presences, of guardians who watch over the world whilst it sleeps. This is a story about those guardians, about the beings who inhabited the spaces between the visible and the invisible, between sleep and wakefulness, between the forest and the clearing where the moon gently casts its light. It is a story that began long before cities existed, long before clocks marked the hours, long before we humans learned to mistrust what we cannot touch. It is a story as ancient as the stars, and as close as the whisper of the wind that right now, at this very moment, brushes the leaves of the tree nearest to where you stand. Let yourself be carried away, for night has fallen, and with it, the guardians awaken. A long time ago, in the lands of northern Europe, where the forests grew so dense that sunlight barely reached the ground, the peoples who inhabited those regions developed an understanding of the world completely different from our own. For them, nature was not a backdrop. It was a living being, conscious, full of will and memory. Every tree had its spirit. Every river held a voice. Every stone that stood motionless in the middle of a meadow had been placed there for reasons no human should question. And in the Scandinavian forests, where the silvery birches glowed beneath the moon like columns of a roofless temple, lived the beings whom the ancient Norwegians called the Huldu folk, the hidden folk. The Huldu folk were not exactly fairies, nor elves, nor ghosts. They were something more subtle, more difficult to define. They were the conscience of the landscape. They were the reason why a path you had walked 1,000 times suddenly seemed unfamiliar on a winter's night. They were the explanation for that sound you heard amongst the trees, that soft rustling, that musical note you couldn't place, that didn't belong to any bird you knew. They lived on the cliffs, on the hills, on the great blocks of volcanic basalt that dotted the Icelandic landscape like sleeping giants. And they had their own laws, their own customs, their own sense of time, which had nothing to do with human time. In Iceland, an island that rose from the ocean through the fire of volcanoes, belief in the hidden people did not disappear with the arrival of Christianity in the year 1000. It did not disappear with modernity. It did not disappear with electricity, nor with cars, nor with telephones. Is greater than, in fact, in the late 20th century, when Icelandic engineers were planning to build a road through a hill on the outskirts of Reykjavik, a group of local residents opposed the plan with the utmost seriousness, arguing that the Huldufolk lived on that hill and that disturbing their home would have consequences no engineering project could calculate. The road was rerouted. The hill remains untouched, and those who know it, those who pass by it on summer nights, when the Icelandic sun barely sets and the sky takes on that golden and pink hue that seems otherworldly, say that sometimes, if you stop and listen with real attention, you can sense something, not exactly hear it, feel it, like a benevolent presence watching over you without threat, that is simply there, that has been there since before the road existed, since before the town existed, since before there was any human memory of that place. The Huldufolk are guardians of a time long past, and their story teaches us something important about the magical beings that populated the imaginations of all the peoples of the earth. It teaches us that guardians are not always warriors. They do not always carry swords or hurl lightning. Often, the most powerful guardians are simply those who remain, those who remember, those who keep alive the connection between the visible world and that other world that exists right beside it, brushing against ours like two sheets of paper separated by the thickness of a sigh. Far from the northern lands, across oceans and continents, in the green and damp heart of the British Isles, another people guarded their own secrets beneath the stars. The Celts, who inhabited those lands from around 800 BC, had a word to describe the places where the two worlds touched. They called them the thin places. The thin places. They were crossroads, hilltops, the shores of certain lakes, the interior of ancient stone circles where the air had a different texture, where time seemed to flow differently, where it was possible, if one was sufficiently awake and sufficiently humble, to hear the voices of those who dwelt on the other side. And in those thin places lived the seed hay, pronounced more or less as she. This Irish word referred to the beings of the other world, whom the Celts also called the Sea, the people of the barrows. For according to ancient Irish mythology, the seed hay did not dwell in the air or the trees, but within the earth itself. They lived beneath the sacred hills, beneath the great burial mounds that dotted the Irish landscape like memories raised towards the sky. The most famous of these places was Brú na Boyne, the palace of the River Boyne, the megalithic complex we now know as Newgrange, built around 3200 BC, 500 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza was erected. A place so ancient that its very antiquity is almost incomprehensible. At Newgrange, the architecture itself seems designed to facilitate contact between the worlds. The great burial mound has an inner passage pointing exactly east, calculated with a precision that astounds modern archaeologists, so that only at 2 times of the year, during the winter solstice, the morning sun penetrates the passageway and fills the inner chamber with golden light. Just 17 minutes a year, around 21 December. The absolute darkness inside transforms into an explosion of light that illuminates the spirals carved into the stones. Those spiral forms that no one has been able to fully decipher, which have been turning in the stone for over 5,000 years, guarding their secrets with the infinite patience of that which is in no hurry. The Celts believed that at that moment, when light penetrated the darkness, the Sidhe opened their doors, that the veil between the worlds thinned until it almost vanished, and that those whose hearts were open enough could, in those 17 minutes of golden light, receive gifts from the people of the other world. Not riches, not power, more subtle and lasting gifts, wisdom, vision, the ability to understand the language of dreams, the possibility of remembering what the soul knew before birth. There is something profoundly beautiful about this idea, in this image of beings who do not display themselves as a show of strength, but wait patiently in the darkness beneath the earth for the exact moment of the year when the geometry of the universe opens a window of light for them. There is something in this that speaks to us of a way of being completely different from our own, a way of being without urgency, without anxiety, with the absolute certainty that the right moment will come, because it always does, because the sun always returns, because light always finds a way in, even into the deepest, darkest places. The night advances gently. The stars move in imperceptible arcs across the horizon, and the story continues, because the stories of the guardians have no single home. They are repeated, with beautiful variations, in every corner of the world where human beings have looked up at the night sky and wondered if they were alone. In ancient Japan, on those Pacific islands where mountains rise abruptly from the sea and cherry trees blossom with such intense beauty that the Japanese dedicated an entire philosophy to them. The magical guardians took on different forms. They were called kami, a word sometimes translated as gods, though that translation is imprecise. The kami were not gods in the Western sense of the term. They were not all-powerful. They did not dwell in a distant heaven. They did not dictate moral laws from on high. The kami were the sacred presence that dwelt in things. In Mount Fuji, whose perfect silhouette is reflected in the lake at dawn. In the old, gnarled pine tree that grows alone on the promontory. In the waterfall cascading amongst the ferns. In the unusually smooth stone that someone found one autumn morning in the bed of a stream and placed on a small makeshift altar because something about it seemed sacred to them, even though they could not have explained exactly why. But there was a type of kami particularly associated with the guardians of the night and the secrets of the forest. The Kodama, the spirits of the trees. According to ancient Shinto tradition, very old trees, those that had grown for hundreds of years, developed a consciousness of their own over time. They became inhabited, not by an external spirit that came to take up residence within them, but by a presence that emerged from the tree itself, from its own longevity, from the accumulation of all the years lived, from all the seasons past, from all the birds that had nested in its branches, and from all the humans who had rested in its shade. A tree inhabited by a Kodama was recognizable, the ancient Japanese said, because its echo was different. If you clapped your hands near it, the sound would return in a slightly different way, with a subtle delay or an unexpected resonance, is greater than, as if the tree were responding, as if something within it had heard and wished to let you know. That is why, in the sacred forests of Japan, in the ancient cedar forests surrounding the great Shinto shrines in places such as Nikko or the Aokigahara forest at the foot of Mount Fuji, many trees have braided straw ropes tied to them, called shimenawa. They are signs of respect. They are the human way of saying, "We know you are not alone. We know there is something here that deserves to be honored." The idea that trees have consciousness, that forests are thinking, communicative beings, is not merely mythology. Contemporary science has begun to uncover what the Japanese, the Celts, the Scandinavians, and dozens of peoples across the globe somehow intuitively knew. Research by biologist Suzanne Simard, published from the 1990s onwards, revealed that trees in forests are connected to one another through networks of underground fungi. These networks, which some scientists call the Wood Wide Web, allow trees to exchange nutrients and chemical signals, mother trees send sugars to the younger ones growing in their shade. Sick trees receive support from their neighbors. Trees in danger emit signals that alert others to the presence of insects. The forest literally communicates, and when it does, when those messages travel silently through the network of roots and fungi beneath our feet, there is something about that image that resonates with the ancient belief in the Kodama. Something that makes us think that perhaps the guardians of the forest were not just poetry. Perhaps they were an intuitive yet profound perception of something real. The fire burns beneath the open sky. Softer now, calmer. The flames dance lazily and the smoke spirals upwards towards the stars. And from the darkness surrounding the circle of light, other stories emerge. For the magical guardians of the world did not dwell only in the cold north, nor on the green islands of the west, nor in the sacred forests of Japan. They also lived in the desert. They also inhabited the heat and the sand. They also knew the language of the wind that blows through the dunes on moonless nights. In the ancient traditions of the Berber peoples of North Africa, in the territories we now know as Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, there existed beings known as Janaun, is greater than. The word is the Arabic plural of jinn, those beings of fire that Islamic tradition drew from much older, pre-Islamic beliefs dating back to the civilizations that inhabited the Sahara when the Sahara was still green, when it was a fertile savanna with lakes and rivers, between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago, in the period archaeologists call the Wet Sahara. Those peoples knew the Jannun before there was a name for them. They knew them as the presences of the desert, the beings that inhabited the crevices of the rocks, the solitary oases, the beds of dry rivers that flowed only during the occasional rains and which for the rest of the year lay dormant beneath the sand like memories of water. The Janaun were not simply dangerous, though they could be. They were not simply benevolent, though they could be that too. They were, like almost all magical guardians in all the world's traditions, morally complex. They had their own families, their own hierarchies, their own joys and their own sorrows. If a human respected them, if they treated them with consideration, is greater than if they avoided unintentionally harming them, which was the most common danger, treading upon their home without realizing it, spilling boiling water on the ground where they rested, forgetting to say the name of God before entering a dark place. The Janaun could be powerful protectors, keepers of secrets, guardians of intangible treasures, the knowledge of healing, the gift of seeing in dreams, the ability to understand the language of animals. And in the desert, at night, when the temperature drops dramatically and the sky becomes so full of stars that it seems impossible that it is the same sky we see from the cities, travelers crossing the caravan routes knew they were not alone. They knew that the wind whipping up the sand in small whirlwinds was not always just wind, that the shadow they glimpsed out of the corner of their eye by the roadside was not always a rock, that the sounds of the desert night, that profound silence which allows you to hear your own heart, were filled with presences that accompanied them, that watched over them, that decided, for their own reasons, whether that traveler deserved to reach their destination or not. Wise travelers would make small offerings at crossroads. A little water poured onto the sand, a few seeds, a red piece of cloth tied to a stone, not as a request, but as a gesture of acknowledgement, as a human way of saying, I see you. I know you are here. I pass through your territory with respect and continue on my way without expecting anything that is not mine. And often, the travelers who did this arrived safe and sometimes they found an oasis that was not on the maps. Sometimes a camel that seemed exhausted would suddenly regain its strength. Sometimes, at the darkest and most disorienting moment of the journey, a breeze would blow from the right direction, and the traveler simply knew, which way to walk. The world is vast and the night is long, and the stories of the guardians fill every corner of the darkness with their gentle light. We now cross the ocean, that immense ocean which for centuries seemed the edge of the known world, and we arrive in the Americas. In the rainforests of the Pacific Northwest, where red cedars grow for thousands of years and their roots sink into soil so dark and so fertile that it smells of time. Here lived the peoples of the Northwest Coast, the Haida, the Tlingit, the Kwakwaka'wakw, societies with artistic and cosmological traditions of extraordinary richness. And in their stories, the guardians of the natural world took the form of something that Western peoples were slow to understand, the spirits of transformation. For these peoples, the world was not sharply divided between the human and the non-human. There was a porosity between species. A raven could be the messenger of the worlds, the creator who stole the light at the beginning of time and placed it in the sky. A bear was a being that had once been human, or that could become human, or that was simultaneously both, depending on your perspective. The salmon that returned each year from the ocean to spawn in the very rivers where it had been born was not merely a fish. It was a sacred being, an envoy from the marine world, which offered its body in exchange for humans honoring its sacrifice and returning its bones to the water so that its spirit might return to the sea and be reborn. And on winter nights, when the darkness lasted 17 or 18 hours, the villages of the northwest coast would gather in the great wooden houses and begin the winter dances. The potlatch, the rituals where the spirits came to visit the human world, is greater than the dancers wore masks that could open and close, revealing a second face within the first, and then a third within the second. For that was exactly what these peoples understood about the nature of guardian beings, that they never had a single form. That reality had layers, that beneath the raven lay the creator, that beneath the human lay the animal, that beneath the mask there was always another mask, and that true wisdom was not to get to the bottom of things, to strip away the ultimate truth, but to learn to live comfortably in multiplicity, in ambiguity, in the space between the layers where magic always happens. There was one being in particular, in the traditions of the northwest coast, who embodied better than any other the nature of the guardians of the threshold. It was the raven, the crow, sometimes called Yale in the Tlingit language. It was not exactly a god, not exactly a spirit, is greater than not exactly an animal. It was a trickster, a sacred deceiver, a figure that moves between worlds as easily as water flows between stones, that deceives and serves at the same time, that creates and destroys with the same gesture, is greater than in the beginning. According to the Haida, the world was completely dark. The raven discovered that an old chief kept the light in a box, inside another box, inside yet another box. And using his cunning and his ability to transform, he turned himself into a child. He gained the old chief's trust, and at the right moment opened the innermost box and released the light into the world. He didn't exactly steal it. He set it free, because the light did not belong to the old chief, even though he guarded it jealously. The light belonged to the world, and the true guardians are not those who keep the sacred to themselves, but those who know when the time has come to open up and let the light in. The night continues to turn above us, slowly and beautifully. The planets trace their invisible paths. The wind carries the scent of damp earth, of grass, of some night-blooming flower that has opened in the darkness, for they only bloom when no one is watching. And from the south of the American continent, from the highlands of the Andes, where snow-capped volcanoes gleam beneath the moon like giant antennas pointing towards the sky, comes the story of other guardians. The Quechua and Aymara peoples, who inhabited the Andean highlands long before the Incas built their great empire in the 13th century, had an understanding of the natural world that placed the emphasis not on the beings that inhabited the forests or the hills, but on the earth itself. For them, the earth was not merely a surface upon which one lived. It was a living being whom they called Pachamama, which can be very roughly translated as Mother Earth, although that translation fails to capture the immensity of the original concept. Pachamama was not a distant deity requiring elaborate rituals. She was a constant, immediate presence that could be felt in the cold of the ground beneath one's hands when one knelt to plant, in the tremor of the earthquake that periodically reminded us that the earth had a will of its own, in the fertility that in some years came in abundance and in others receded like a tide. But Pachamama was not alone. She had servants, emissaries, local guardians known as apus. The apus were the spirits of the mountains. Every great mountain, every imposing snow-capped peak was the visible manifestation of an apu, a powerful being who ruled over that specific territory, who protected the villages living on its slopes, who sent the rain or held it back, who favored travelers or put them in difficulty depending on how they had been treated. The Apu of Ausangate, the great snow-capped peak of Cusco rising to over 6,000 meters, was considered one of the most powerful in the Andean world. And in the villages at its feet, even today, even in the 21st century, the inhabitants make regular offerings to the Apu. They give him coca leaves, the most beautiful and the most whole. They offer him chicha, the sacred corn beer. They speak to him. They explain their needs to him. And the Apu listens. Also feel those who know this tradition. They feel it in the wind that changes direction. They feel it in the dream that comes that night with unusual clarity, bringing answers that the waking mind could not find. There is an Andean ceremony celebrated, especially during times of transition. At those times of the year when Pachamama is renewed. On 1st August, which in the Andean calendar marks the beginning of the new agricultural cycle, the earth opens up. Not metaphorically. The Andeans say that the earth is hungry on that day, that it needs to be fed, that if one walks barefoot on the ground in August, one can feel how the earth pulls at one, how it tries to nourish itself with human energy to renew its own energy. That is why they make offerings. That is why they bury small bundles of food, textiles, chicha, koga, with which to feed the earth so that the earth, sated and grateful, may return fertility and protection throughout the coming year. This idea that the relationship between human beings and the guardians of the world is not one of power but of reciprocity appears in almost all the world's traditions of magical guardians. It is not a matter of begging more powerful beings to grant you favors. It is about maintaining a balance, about giving back what you receive, about remembering that we humans are part of the fabric of the world, not its owners, and that the guardians are, in a way, the world's memory. They are the ones who remember that balance when humans forget it. They are the ones who remind us, sometimes gently and sometimes in ways we cannot ignore, when we stray too far from the reciprocity that keeps the world running. Far from the Andes, on the other side of the world, on the large island in the South Pacific that the Maori call Aotearoa and which the rest of the world knows as New Zealand, the magical guardians of the landscape took yet another form. The Maori arrived on those islands around the year 1100, sailing from Polynesia in wooden canoes that crossed thousands of kilometers of open ocean without modern navigational instruments, guided by the stars, ocean currents, the flight of birds, and the color of the water. When they arrived, they found a land of extraordinary beauty and a completely unique ecology, birds that could not fly because on those islands, before the arrival of humans, there were no land predators. Tree ferns several meters tall, fjords cutting deep into mist-shrouded mountains, a natural world so unique it seemed to be from another planet. And in that natural world, the Maori recognized the presence of guardians they called taniwha. The taniwha were water beings. They inhabited the rivers, the lakes, the fjords, the coastal caves. They could take the form of large lizards, or sharks, or sea snakes, or even floating logs moving against the current. They were not always dangerous, though they could be. Many taniwha were protectors of the Maori villages that lived near the waters they inhabited. They warned of danger. They guided fishermen back to shore when the fog rolled in. They indicated the places where it was safe to wade across the river and the places where it was dangerous. But there were rules. The taniwha would not offer their protection to those who did not respect them. If anyone threw rubbish into the river, if anyone crossed the water without an offering or acknowledgement, if anyone ignored the warning sign the river gave when its waters rose in a certain way, the taniwha might become indifferent. And a guardian's indifference is, in its own way, the greatest of dangers. Not because the guardian attacks, simply because it ceases to protect. And without the protection of the water guardian, the water does what water does when there is no one to calm it. It rises and overflows and carries away everything in its path. This ambivalence, this balance between protection and danger, between benevolence and force, is one of the most consistent characteristics of guardian beings in all the world's traditions. They are not angels in the Western sense of the term, beings of pure goodness who exist solely to serve. They are forces. They are intelligences. They are beings with a will of their own who have chosen or have been appointed to maintain harmony in a specific part of the world. And that harmony sometimes requires harshness, sometimes requires boundaries, sometimes requires saying no in a way that a human being feels throughout their body, as the realization that there are forces in the world that are not subordinate to human will. And there is something deeply reassuring in that idea, if one allows oneself to feel it. The idea that the world is looked after, that there are presences, whatever name we give them, whatever form they take in the imagination of each people, that maintain the balance, that remember what must be remembered, that watch over us whilst we sleep. The moon has moved. It is higher now, smaller in the sky, colder and clearer. Its light spills over the earth with a silent generosity, and beneath that light, stories continue to flow from every corner of the world towards this moment of stillness. In ancient China, in that vast land of unbroken civilization stretching back over 4,000 years, magical guardians took forms that blended nature with wisdom in a particularly beautiful way. Chinese dragons, so different from Western dragons that they share little more than the name, were not creatures of destruction. They were guardians of the water and the sky. The Longwang, the Dragon King, ruled the seas, the rivers, the lakes, the rain. His underwater palaces were places of unimaginable magnificence, filled with treasures not in the form of gold, but in the form of knowledge, of secret medicinal recipes, of seeds from plants that did not exist on the surface. When drought threatened a region, the villagers prayed to the Dragon King. They held processions and made offerings. They begged him to open the heavenly reservoirs and send the rain. And when the rain came, they did not attribute it to meteorological chance. They attributed it to a decision, to benevolence, to a guardian who had listened and who had responded in his own way, which was the way of water, silent, persistent, arriving from above without warning and transforming the parched earth into something capable of giving life. But in China, there were also more intimate guardians, more everyday ones. The mention, the guards of the doors. Every home, every shop, every temple had its mention. Two painted or sculpted figures on either side of the entrance, usually clad in armor and with a stern expression, whose function was exactly what their name implies: to guard the threshold, to prevent evil spirits from crossing the threshold, to ensure that what entered the house was beneficial and that what should remain outside stayed outside. It was a domestic, everyday, seemingly minor function. But think about what it implies. It implies that even the smallest space, even the door of a modest country cottage, deserved its own guardian. That the separation between inside and outside, between the familiar and the unknown, between home and the world, was a sacred separation that needed to be honored and protected. This idea of the guardians of the threshold appears in almost every culture in the world. The Romans called them laws and penates, the spirits of the home and the pantry. The Greeks had Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, whose sacred fire must never be allowed to go out because it was the heart of the home. The Slavs of Eastern Europe had the domovoi, is greater than a small, hairy creature that lived behind the stove or under the threshold, which protected the house and its family if treated kindly, which ceased to protect it if offended, and which became mischievous and noisy if ignored for too long. The Japanese had the zashiki warashi, childlike spirits that inhabited the rooms of old houses and brought prosperity to the homes where they resided, to the extent that when a zashiki warashi decided to leave, the family that had sheltered it inevitably entered a period of decline. All these guardians of the home share something. They are small. They are not cosmological. They do not rule the seas or the skies or the great movements of history. They concern themselves with the everyday, with the domestic, with the most intimate and vulnerable dimension of human experience, the home, the place where one rests, where one sleeps, where one keeps what one loves most, and that there are beings dedicated specifically to caring for that space, that traditions all over the world have felt the need to imagine, to honor, to keep present the existence of those small, silent guardians of daily rest, says something very profound about what we human beings need. We need to know that the place where we fall asleep is guarded. That something, someone, a benevolent though invisible presence, watches over us whilst our eyes close and our consciousness lets go, and sleep arrives with its inevitable gentleness. The fire is now just embers, a red, tranquil light that pulses like the breath of something asleep. The stars have traveled another stretch along their eternal arc, and in this moment of stillness, history brings forth one of the most enigmatic and beautiful guardians the human imagination has ever conceived. In the tradition of the peoples of West Africa, particularly among the Yoruba of what are now Nigeria and Benin, the guardians of the world did not dwell outside human beings. They dwelt within, or more precisely, they existed in the space between the divine and the human, as intermediaries, as translators between the will of Olodumare, the supreme principle of the Yoruba cosmos, and the lives of the specific human beings who inhabited the world. These intermediaries were called orishas, and were beings of such complexity and symbolic richness that they would have filled several art museums and several philosophy libraries. Each orisha had its own personality, its own domains, its own sacred colors and metals, its own day of the week, its own dietary taboos, their own stories, and every human being, according to Yoruba tradition, had a personal orisha, a specific guardian whom they had chosen, or who had been chosen for them before birth, at that moment of existence preceding incarnation. Eshu Elegba, also known as Elegbara or Exu, in the versions that the Yoruba people brought with them to the American continent during the centuries of the slave trade, was the guardian of crossroads, the lord of thresholds, of beginnings, of endings, of moments of decision. Without his permission, no other communication between humans and the orishas was possible. He was the first to be honored in any ceremony, in any petition, not because he was the most powerful in a hierarchical sense, but because he controlled access. He was the guardian of the guardian, the gatekeeper of all gatekeepers. Like the great guardians of all traditions, Elegba possessed an intrinsic duality. He could either smooth the path or block it. He could clarify the message or cloud it. Is greater than he could reveal the truth one needed to hear, even if it was uncomfortable. Or he could shroud things in confusion if the questioner was not ready for the answer. He was like the Haida raven, like the Janoun of the desert, like the Maori Taniwa, a being that did not submit to human will. That had its own rules, its own considerations, its own moments of opening and closing. and that for that very reason, precisely for that reason, was truly sacred. The Yoruba philosophy of the world, which survived the horror of slavery and transformed and adapted and flourished in the Americas in the form of religious traditions such as candomblé in Brazil, Santeria in Cuba, voodoo in Haiti, tells us something fundamental about why magical guardians have always been so important in the human experience. It tells us that human beings are never completely alone on their journey, that there are forces, intelligences, presences that accompany them, that the radical solitude which Western modernity has placed at the center of the human experience, that idea that we are isolated individuals in an indifferent universe, is an extraordinarily recent and extraordinarily strange idea in the history of humanity. For most of our existence as a species, human beings have lived in an inhabited world, a world full of presences, a world where the guardian stood at the threshold, in the tree, on the mountain, in the river, at the door, at the crossroads, and also, always also, within the human heart itself. The wind has changed. It now carries the scent of rain that has not yet arrived, but is on its way, which can be felt in the air like a promise. And from the other side of the world, from the plains of India, where tigers walk amongst the trees of the Sundarbans and the river Ganges, carries the flowers and offerings of millions of people towards the ocean. Another story of guardians arrives. In the Hindu tradition, perhaps the oldest of the world's great living religious traditions, with sacred texts dating back to the 2nd millennium BC, the guardians of the world took on a form that combined the cosmological with the intimate in a way that has no equivalent in any other tradition. The Devas, the luminous beings, inhabited the higher realms, the celestial spheres, the domains of the sky, the sun and the thunder. But there were also the Yaksha, guardians of the earth's treasures, beings who guarded the forests and springs and crossroads, depicted in ancient Indian art with robust bodies and expressions of an earthly, immediate joy, very different from the ascetic serenity that Westerners often associate with the sacred in India. And then there were the Apsaras, the celestial dancers, beings of water and cloud who dwelt in the heavens but descended to earth at times of transition, at dawn and dusk, in moments of rain, in the moments before storms. They were guardians of the world's beauty. In a way, reminders that reality had an aesthetic dimension that was not incidental but fundamental, that the world was not merely a place to survive, but a place to be moved, a place where beauty was in itself a form of knowledge, a way of coming into contact with that which transcends the everyday. But the closest guardian the most personal, the one no devout Hindu ever forgot, was Ganesha, the one with the elephant's head, the son of Shiva and Parvati, the lord of beginnings and obstacles. If you wanted to set out on a journey, start a business, begin a course of study, get married, write a book, plant a garden, undertake anything new under the sun, the first thing was to honor Ganesha, because Ganesha had the power to remove obstacles from the path, and also, if he saw fit, to place them there, because obstacles are not always the enemy of the path. Sometimes they are the path. Sometimes they are the way the guardian tells you this is not the right time, or this is not the right direction, or there is something you need to learn before you can continue. Ganesha is depicted in millions of Hindu homes around the world, on doorsteps, on desks, on family altars, on car dashboards. He is perhaps the most democratic and accessible guardian of all those we have visited this evening, a being who demands no elaborate rituals or great sacrifices, but who can be honored with a flower, with a sweet, with the simple acknowledgement of his presence, with the humility to admit that no path is traveled alone, that we all need the guidance of something that knows more than we do about the obstacles that lie ahead. The embers are slowly dying out. The moon is waning, leaning towards the west with the dignity of one who has fulfilled their purpose and knows they may rest. And in this deepening silence, this stillness that is fading, becoming more complete with every passing minute, the story reaches its most intimate part, the most familiar, the one we have known since childhood, though perhaps we have forgotten it over time, just as we forget the things we believe we no longer need. For magical guardians are not merely the heritage of distant peoples or bygone times. They are also in Europe, in the tradition that shaped us most directly. If the reader is hearing these words from the lands of the West, they are in the tales that grandmothers told, and that mothers told, and that books recorded with greater or lesser fidelity before the oral tradition was interrupted. European fairies, those creatures whom folklore has treated so badly, reducing them to figures with dragonfly wings and starry wands, were originally something far more serious and far more beautiful. The fairies of the genuine folklore of Scotland, Ireland, England and Britain were beings of considerable power and possessed a morality of their own that did not always coincide with human morality. They were called the good people, not because they were necessarily kind, but because, to speak their true name directly, the fairy people was considered unwise. It was better to refer to them with respectful euphemisms: the good people, the neighbors, those from the other place, those who dwell beneath the hill. They lived, like the Irish cedar, beneath the hills and in the burial mounds. They had their own kingdoms, with their own kings and queens, their own hierarchies and their own cycles of time. One night in the fairy realm could be a human year, or 100 years, or it might not be time in any sense that we humans could measure. Whoever entered that realm, whoever crossed the threshold by accident or by invitation, might return to the human world an old man when he had left as a young man, or might return with a new skill, a song that no one had heard before, a recipe to cure a disease that human doctors did not know how to treat. The boundary between the fairy realm and the human world was porous, especially at certain times. Samhain night, which, in the Celtic calendar, marked the end of the year and the beginning of winter, and which we now know as Halloween, was the time when this boundary was at its most porous. Is greater than Beltane night, the first day of May, when spring was in full swing and the world was brimming with life, was another particularly thin moment. On those nights, according to tradition, the processions of the good people could be seen by those with the right eyes, is greater than crossing the fields in silent, glowing formations, moving from one hill to another along paths that humans could not see but which animals, especially horses, recognized instantly with that strange unease that makes them suddenly stand still and prick up their ears towards something no human can see or hear. And amongst the most distinctive guardians of Celtic folklore, there was one that deserves special attention tonight: the Selkie. Selkies were sea creatures, specifically from the coasts of Scotland, Ireland, the Orkney Islands, and the Shetland, who took the form of seals in the water and who, on land, could shed their sealskin and walk in human form. They were beings of a particular melancholy, of a longing that was never fully sated, neither at sea nor on land, of a divided belonging that made them perfect guardians of the threshold between two worlds. And in the fishing villages along the Scottish coast, belief in the Selkies was not metaphorical. It was literal. The fishermen knew that the seals watching them from the rocks might be something more than just seals. They treated them with respect. They did not harm them unnecessarily. And sometimes, on nights of the full moon, when the tide was high and the sea had that silvery surface that makes gazing at the horizon seem like looking into something infinite, they would hear in the distance a sound that was not quite the cry of an animal, nor quite a human song. It was something in between, and those who heard it said they felt, for the brief moment it lasted, a longing for something they could not name, a yearning for something they could not pinpoint, as if the Selkie, with her voice halfway between two worlds, were reminding them that they too, all human beings too, are creatures of the threshold, that we all live on the edge between what we are and what we could be, between what we remember and what we have forgotten, between the world we see and the world that exists, silent and full, just on the other side of the visible. The night is at its deepest. That moment that comes a little after midnight, a little before the first sign that dawn exists somewhere to the east of the horizon. It is the darkest hour and the stillest hour. And it is precisely the hour that all the world's traditions have recognized as the most sacred, the most laden with possibilities. The hour when the guardians are most alert and the human world most given over to sleep. In this silence, we can do something that seekers of magic throughout the ages have done: become completely still and listen. Seek nothing in particular. Just listen to the sound of one's own breathing, the beating of the heart, the whisper of the wind, the creaking of the house settling, the distant, almost imperceptible sound of the sleeping city. And within that listening, if one allows oneself to be completely present and completely still, sometimes there is something. It is not exactly a sound. It is rather a quality in the silence, a kind of presence within the absence. Like when the wind suddenly stops in the forest and all the birds fall silent at once, and there is a moment of perfect suspension before the world resumes its normal music. In that instant, in that pause of silence within silence, humans throughout the ages have sensed what can perhaps only be described as the existence of something else. Something that is not the everyday self. Something that is not ordinary thought. Something that lies in the space between one thought and the next. Between one breath and the next. In that place which Buddhists call the interval, which the Celts call the thin place, and which Siberian shamans call the space between the worlds. That is where the guardians dwell. Not in the spectacle of the extraordinary, not in showy miracles, not in luminous apparitions, but in that subtle space, in that still interval, where consciousness can, if it is sufficiently relaxed and sufficiently open, touch something that is always there, but that the noise of the day never allows us to hear. The guardians of all the world's traditions, the Haldu folk of the north, the Sidhe of Ireland, the Japanese Kodama, the Jainaun of the desert, the Apus of the Andes, the Taniwa of New Zealand, the Orishas of West Africa, the Fairies of Scotland, the Kami of Japan. All of them share something that only becomes visible when we look at them together from a distance. All of them are fundamentally the personification of presence, of the idea that the world is not an empty machine but an inhabited organism, that nature possesses consciousness in ways that we humans cannot fully comprehend, but which we can, if we approach with humility and stillness, sense. And all of them, without exception, are particularly active at night. Night is their time. The time of the guardians is not the time of midday, when everything is visible and explainable and mappable. It is the time of darkness, when the certainties of the day soften, when the boundaries between the possible and the impossible become less rigid, when human beings, having cast off the armor of doing and knowing and controlling, are closer to the fundamental truth of their existence, that they are small, that they are vulnerable, that they do not know everything, that there are mysteries that surpass them, and that this smallness and this vulnerability, far from being threatening, are in fact the gateway to something greater and more beautiful than daytime thought can conceive. The stars move so slowly that it seems as though they do not move. But they do move. They have been moving since before the earth existed. They have been turning their wheels of fire in the silence of space. And beneath them, on this small, blue, and extraordinarily improbable planet, human beings have looked up for hundreds of thousands of years and have tried to find meaning in those lights. An order, a promise that the universe is not random, that there is an intention behind the beauty, that the guardians of the stars also watch over us from above, just as the guardians of the forest watch over us from the trees, and the guardians of the sea watch over us from the waves. In Mesopotamia, in those lands between the Tigris and the Euphrates, where writing was born, and with it humanity's enduring memory, some 5,000 years ago, the priest astronomers who observed the sky from the tops of the ziggurats developed the world's first astrology. It was not a pseudoscience, as it is sometimes condescendingly described. It was a way of understanding the relationship between the macrocosm and the microcosm, between the movements of the planets and the cycles of human life. The stars were the writing of the gods, and the priests were the translators. Each planet had its divine guardian. The planet we now call Venus belonged to Inanna, the goddess of love and war, a being of passionate duality. The planet we now call Jupiter belonged to Marduk, the guardian of cosmic order. The one we call Saturn belonged to Ninurta, the lord of the earth, agriculture, and slow time. And their movements across the sky were not accidental. They were messages, They were the way in which the celestial guardians communicated their will to those who had the patience and knowledge to read them. This idea that celestial movements are a form of language used by the guardians of the cosmos flowed from Mesopotamia to Greece, to Rome, to medieval Islam, to the European Renaissance. Kepler, who lived between 1571 and 1630, one of the founders of modern astronomy, who discovered the laws of planetary motion that bear his name, was also a practicing astrologer. Not because it was superstitious, but because for him, as for the priests of Ur and Babylon who had preceded him by 4 millennia, celestial mechanics and the search for meaning in the cosmos were not contradictory. They were two ways of asking the same question. What does the architecture of the universe tell us about the nature of what we are and what we might become? The last quarter moon hangs over the horizon like the final question of the day before sleep comes to erase it. And in this state of suspension that exists between the end of the story and the beginning of the dream, there is one last guardian to visit, perhaps the closest of all, perhaps the one who has never left, the one who has never needed to be sought because he has always been exactly where you were. Dreams have their own guardians. In ancient Greece, the god of dreams was Morpheus, son of Hypnos, the sleep, and grandson of Nyx, the night. Morpheus dwelt in a cave in Erebus, the underworld, where poppies and other sleep-inducing plants grew beside a river whose waters brought forgetfulness. From that cave, he traveled every night to the world of the sleepers, taking on human forms to deliver the messages the gods wished to convey. He was a guardian of communication between worlds, a being who could take any form because that was precisely his nature, the very form of a dream, which can be anything and which can never be fully grasped. But before Morpheus, before the Greeks gave him a name and lineage and a cave and a genealogy, dreams had older and more diffuse guardians. The Sumerians believed that during sleep, the soul temporarily left the body and traveled. That what the dreamer experienced was not a figment of their mind, but a real visit to real places, sometimes in the known world, and sometimes in places that had no equivalent in the waking world. And that on those journeys, the soul needed protection. It needed guides. It needed beings who knew the ways of the dream world and who would accompany the dreamer back to their body when the time came to wake up. The Iroquois of northeastern North America had a practice they called dream sharing. Every morning, members of the community would recount the dreams they had had, not for entertainment, but as information, as messages that the dream guardians had delivered during the night and that the community, as a whole, needed to know in order to understand which needs had gone unmet, which paths were blocked, and what healings were required. The dream was not private. The dream was communal. It was the way in which the guardians of the other world communicated with the living, and it was everyone's responsibility to listen to that communication and act accordingly. And in the tradition of the Australian Aborigines, perhaps the oldest living culture on the planet, with a history stretching back over 60,000 years, dreams have a dimension that completely transcends the Western notion of dreams as a byproduct of the sleeping brain. The dream time, Chukurpa in the language of the Anangu, is the fundamental dimension of reality. It was not long ago, and it is not yet over. It is simultaneously the past, the present, and the future. It is the layer of reality where the ancestral beings, the primordial guardians of the world, created the landscape, named things, established the laws that keep the world in balance. And that layer continues to exist. Right now, beneath the layer of the visible world, accessible to those who know how to enter, through songs, through the sacred paths that the ancestors traced across the continent, which are at once geographical and spiritual roots, through the dreams that each night open a window onto that permanent backdrop of reality where the guardians of the first time continue to do what they have always done, sustain the world. And so we come to the end of this journey, or perhaps to the beginning, because the stories of the guardians do not end. They fold in upon themselves like the dream you are about to have, which will end when you wake, but which will be waiting for the next night, always waiting, like the Hulder folk on their hills, and the Seedhay in their burial mounds, and the Kodama in their trees, and the Apus on their snow-capped mountains. Tonight we have wandered through the forests of Scandinavia and the hills of Ireland. We have heard the kami in the Japanese cedars and the janown in the wind of the Sahara. We have felt the presence of the apus on the snow-capped Andes and the taniwha in the fjords of New Zealand. We have honored Eligba at the crossroads and Ganesha on the thresholds. We have heard the song of the Selkies on full moon nights and the echo of the Kodama in ancient forests. And in each of these stories, which come from cultures so different that they would seem to have nothing in common, we have found the same heart beating. The heart that says, "You are not alone. The world is inhabited. Nature is not silent. The trees are not indifferent. The river does not ignore you. The mountain has seen you pass by. And in the closest place of all, in the space between one thought and the next, in the interval of silence that exists at the center of every breath, there is something that watches over, that cares, that remembers what you, in the rush of the day, have forgotten. The guardians are there tonight, as they have been every night since the beginning. They are in the sound of the wind that is brushing against the nearest window right now. They are in the rustling of the leaves, in the distant murmur of some nocturnal animal, in the deep silence that lies beneath all the sounds, like the depths of a calm ocean that sustains all the movement on the surface. You may let your eyes close now. You may let go of your thoughts and let the night do its work, which is the oldest work in the world, to watch over the sleep of those who trust in it. The guardians are awake. The night is full. And you, who have traveled tonight through the forests and deserts and mountains and oceans of the world in search of their secrets, may now rest with the quiet certainty that the most important secrets are not to be found in any distant place. They are here, at this moment, in this breath that is released, in this moment of stillness where the day ends and sleep begins, and the guardians of the night watch, as they have always watched, as they will always watch, with that infinite patience possessed by beings who need no one to see them in order to exist. Sleep. The night is good. The world is safe. The stars keep turning, and the guardians are awake.
Release the tension in your forehead. Relax the muscles around your eyes. Let your arms rest completely, heavy and warm at either side of your body. Your breath now flows naturally, like gentle waves lapping at the shore and receding effortlessly. The stories you have heard tonight slowly fade away, becoming distant whispers that you no longer need to follow. If this journey through time has served you well, you can support this space by liking, subscribing, or sharing your thoughts in the comments. That way, more people seeking rest may find refuge here. And if you are still awake, there is another story waiting in silence, ready to guide you deeper into sleep. But for now, let the voices of the past fade gently away. Let the names, dates, and events melt into the mist of the night's oblivion. The story can wait until tomorrow. Close your eyes. Let go of everything. Rest deeply, and may you have sweet dreams.